this is a reporter's dream. I mean, on one hand, you have the International Federation of Robotics, who argues that the deployment of this robotics technology is going to create the biggest job renaissance in history. And on the other hand, you have people like Moshe Vardi, a computer scientist at Rice, who argue no human jobs at all by 2040. Well, he says robots and computers will be able to do everything that humans do by 2045. Well, who's right? I've read the literature now for a long time, and it's all over the map. And I'm convinced that the things that will actually make this happen one way or another haven't happened yet. Let me give you one example, because so many of the books point to this. My point is that it's extremely nuanced, and we're not sort of, two examples actually to get at this. One is that 3 of the books, and I won't name the books, cite this, the Instagram versus Kodak. And the implication is 13 programmers at Instagram have displaced 140,000 workers at Kodak, digital photography versus chemical photography. And when you start to pick that apart, the first thing you realize is that Instagram didn't kill Kodak. Kodak killed itself. It put a gun to its head and it pulled the trigger many times. And the proof of that is Fuji, its principal competitor, made it across the chasm just fine. So obviously something else is at foot. And the next thing you look at is Instagram did not come into existence until the mature internet happened. How many jobs came out of the mature internet? The best number I can come up with is from McKinsey, about 2.5 million jobs. So, and many of them great jobs, right? Engineering jobs, technical jobs. It just is, it's just a much more complicated subject. One more story to that point. Because I'm part of the problem. It was my reporting in 2010 about this next wave of technology, reporting on the fact that $35 an hour paralegals and $400 an hour attorneys were being displaced by e-discovery software. It was one of the things that sort of kicked off this frenzy. At one point, maybe a year or two ago, I was having this discussion with Danny Kahneman, the economist, and I was basically my hair was on fire about the impact of robotics on China, of course, which is where all of our manufacturing is going. What happens when robots come to China? And Kahneman says to me, you don't get it. In China, the robots are coming just in time. I said, excuse me? And he pointed out to me that China is a very rapidly aging economy. Their workforce is going to be shrinking. The Chinese are going to need robots in their workforce, and they're going to need robots in elder care. And then if you start looking at the world, if you look at China, if you look at Japan, my God, the US just had, the New York Times just had this amazing article about ghost houses. I mean, Japanese society is imploding on itself, and it's shrinking incredibly rapidly. Look at Korea, the same thing's true. Look at Europe, which is also aging very rapidly. The irony, of course, is the US is kind of an exception because we have immigration, and we're somewhat insulated from that. Donald Trump, where are you?
I was just thinking that.
The EU is spending $1 billion to develop an elder care robot. And if you look at the DARPA outtakes of those falling robots, you don't want those robots anywhere near grandma. So we got a lot of work to do. It's just a super complex and fascinating section. So for the people who are sort of worried about this problem, how do you explain that right now in America, more people are working than ever before in history, 140 million people, and people say, oh, but wait, labor force participation is declining, okay? And you start to pick that apart, and yes, you're right, labor force participation is declining, but when you read the mainstream economists, technology is a small part of that, but there are all kinds of other factors, and so once again, it's very complex.